podcast. Welcome to This Is Her Story. I'm Joanne Bastine. All of my friends and frenemies, I don't know, whatever. Um, anyway, I'm excited about this is episode 120, and I want you to meet my friend Hope Ray. So Hope is a therapist and a theoretician, which I'm not really sure what that means, but uh, you'll get the idea when we interview and when we talk in this interview. She is the pioneer of complex partner trauma, and she also has her own podcast. And so you can follow her on all the social medias. I'm going to link all of that down below in the show notes. So please check it out. You'll want to follow her, especially on TikTok and Instagram, where she has some videos. But then also obviously check out her website. So good news. She is actually local. She's here in the Detroit metro area. And it was great to meet her and to just hear about her practice and how she's helping couples. One of the things that she really specializes in is this idea of sexual addictions. So it might be pornography, multiple affairs. And she has a term a phrase that she's coined called betrayal violence. And so we talk about what that means. And then we get into stay shaming and then also the psychology of persuasion. So you're definitely going to want to stick it out to the end. Now, I know I've been doing this series on deconstruction, and technically this is not really a deconstruction episode. However, and we mostly talk about counseling and betrayal violence in the context of marriage. However, if you're deconstructing, and even if you're not deconstructing, as you listen to this interview, you will see how applicable this is to the church. I ask her a lot of questions about how pastors, clergy, chaplains can help people who are walking through betrayal in their marriage. And so I think there's going to be a lot of resources in this episode. She's also working on doing workshops and training and stuff for organizations. And so you're definitely going to want to get on her website and sign up for newsletters or whatever she has available so that as new things come out, you'll have access to those resources. Because I think no matter what your ministry looks like, whatever form that you're pastoring in, there's going to be a lot of valuable tools that you're going to find here. So I'm really looking forward to you hearing this. And then when we get towards the end, we start talking a little bit about stay shaming. And I think for me personally, that all of it was excellent. This is all excellent information that she has. Very interesting. I took a ton of notes. But the stay shaming, I think for me was particularly interesting because I always think of this idea of stay shaming as shaming people into staying. But then we also look at the other side of shaming people for staying, which was enlightening. And so we talk about how do you find that middle of the road, right? How do you find where like shame should not be a part of the church? And so we walk through some of that. And so I hope you'll stick it out to the very end. Anyway, I think you'll really enjoy it. Check her out and enjoy the episode. We've been trying to tell better stories about women and clergy and the church because we really need to tell better stories. Instead of just complaining about it, what if we flood the airwaves with something different? Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
I'm so excited. Joanne, thank you for your invitation. You know, talking with pastors, clergy, ministers in the church, this is such an important area in my heart and in my work because, man, I know how many of my clients first go to their church centers and their faith communities to look for help. And there's so much that we can offer from these places, but sometimes there's a few things to look out for. So I'm excited to dive in with you today about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that I've tried to do in this podcast, this episode, but then other episodes as well, is really that we're trying to undo some of the toxic theology that has cropped up right over the years, and give pastors and clergy another way to understand abuse and to recognize it more quickly, so that they can just be advocates for anyone in the church. Obviously, women and children tend to be the number one victims, but we also know that men can be victimized as well. But I want them to have the resources that they need to be better pastors, because we need better pastors out there in the church. And then I also think that it will help any of the lay people who are listening, who are feeling like their pastors are the toxic ones, and they're trying to figure out how do I deal with this? Who can I go to that will actually help me, and those kind of things. So yeah, yeah. Now you've been a licensed counselor for how long? How long have you been doing this in your practice?
Yes, since 2012, and my area of expertise began with studying compulsive or addictive sexual behaviors. And within that focus, I really began to focus on what the partner's experience is when somebody that they are married to or partnered with has secret sexual behavior, whether it's, a full-blown addictive kind of thing, or there's just infidelity, cheating, affairs, hidden pornography use. These things create a lot of pain, a lot of damage to the relational dynamic, a lot of trauma for the partner. And so I began to look into that, early on. So for the past 10 years, that's been my area of piqued interest. And so recently I finally released the work that I've, kind of culminated from all that time observing and working with clients for a decade. And so it's essentially a theory called complex partner trauma. It's a framework that helps us to understand what partners would experience after experiencing what I call betrayal violence.
Yeah, and you started actual Betrayal Violence Institute. I like that terminology. I feel like it gives us a better idea of, like, betrayal is one of those words that it means a lot of things to a lot of different people, right?
Right.
It's kind of an abstract concept. So will you talk about, like, what is the difference between what we think of in just everyday betrayal, right? Like, my friend told a secret that I shared with them in confidence and I feel betrayed, versus what you're talking about when you talk about this idea of betrayal violence.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, violence is a strong word. And the type of violence that we're talking about here is not the kind that includes black eyes and bruises. And so we can talk more about that. Nonetheless, society really needs a more thorough and in-depth understanding of violence, because the way it's truly defined really means that whether or not somebody wanted to cause harm, if they intentionally used power and control over a person, whether in physical or emotional or psychological ways, that if detriment is caused to that person by being subjected to that power and control, that's a violent outcome. That's violence. And so when I talk about betrayal violence, I'm talking about something that happens within an intimate partnership where one person is secretly and repeatedly violating fidelity, and the other person is being deliberately kept from knowing this information, sometimes for years or decades. And what that does is, when that partner's reality is being controlled and managed by their partner, it creates a power differential. And that unknowing partner is now in a place of endangerment where they can't accurately assess their own safety and well-being within the relationship because they don't know the full picture of what's going on. They may have detected some evidence, or there may be some instances where, things came to light, or there was a confession of sorts. But at the end of the day, the partner doesn't have the full picture of their endangerment, and therefore they continue bonding, connecting, attachment, investing with their partner under unsafe circumstances because they don't know the circumstances are unsafe. This is where trauma really begins to culminate. Listen, it's very difficult and painful to be cheated on, but when that occurs alongside all of this deception and reality control, even exploitation of the partner's trust, then we have violence. And even though it may be non-physical, although some people are subjected to sexually transmitted infections in the course of this type of violence, but even though it may be non-physical, it's the idea that power and control is being used to manage the reality of the partner. And therefore that partner gets put into a one down position, and the other partner knows more about that partner's reality than he or she does. So when we talk about betrayal violence, yeah, we're using strong terminology because this is a serious thing, and it needs to be articulated clearly so that we can help when people are caught in these positions, whether they're the ones, causing the violence, or whether they're the one on the victim and receiving this type of mistreatment.
Yeah, and I saw you were talking a little bit about this at one of your clips on your Instagram, I think it was, and you were talking about using this terminology with men, and um, about how I think you were talking about how they like receive it better,
Mhm.
or maybe it just puts it in a different context. Will you talk a little bit about that idea?
Yeah. So I'm in the Midwest. The dominant group that I work with as far as couples who face betrayal violence goes would be the, cisgender heterosexual couple where the man is the one with the secret sexual behavior and the woman is the one who is victimized by the betrayal violence. And so oftentimes when I'm explaining betrayal violence conduct to men, if they're serious about trying to restore their relationship, they find this information very clarifying, even relieving. Nobody wants to associate themselves with abusive behavior, right? But when they've been hearing from their wife or their partner, all this stuff about what they've put them through and how they've hurt them so much, sometimes the language is not as clear, especially when it's emotionally charged and trauma based. So a lot of men find it relieving to see the structure of betrayal violence, where I really break down what's going on and what are the maladaptive character traits that are undergirding this abusive behavior. Furthermore, I think betrayal violence really clarifies that for people who have been secretly cheating, it's not enough to restore the relationship just to simply become a faithful partner. Listen, that's what your partner has been doing all along, and it's kind of ground zero, like a baseline requirement. Being faithful, stopping cheating doesn't automatically restore what's been damaged by the abusive aspects of the behavior. And again, the abuse is the deception, the persuasion and mind control, and the exploitation of the partner's trust or finances or domestic labor. So at the end of the day, oftentimes men will find this to be helpful because it identifies what the problem is. It puts into words what their wives have been trying to communicate to them, and it makes them feel hopeful that maybe something could be done about it in an organized way, where they know what they need to do now to move forward in trying to, become trustworthy and help their partners heal.
Yeah, I feel like that it gives them a starting place, right?
Right.
Yeah, like, okay, I here's very specific things I need to address, and we can take this step by step, and it doesn't feel as overwhelming, right? Like, I think when you're trying to repair any relationship, there's, okay, I've said I'm sorry. Now, how do I rebuild the trust? Because trust
Yeah.
is a valuable commodity, and once it's gone,
Yes. Yes. And so many people, talking particularly about men who've cheated and had infidelity secretly for a long time. When they get into a solid place of healthy sexuality, and they're no longer doing those secret repeated fidelity violations, they often feel really stuck and helpless, like, I've become trustworthy in that regard, but it's not translating over to my partner. And the reason for that is because the power differential hasn't yet been dissolved. And that's the work that I do through the Betrayal Violence Institute. And I'm helping other professionals across a variety of disciplines learn how to identify the power differential that's there and recognize that it's not enough just to cultivate a healthy sexuality and faithfulness. The power differential also needs to be dissolved. And that's the work of the person who has done the betraying. And so that's what I teach them how to do as we look at their conduct in betrayal violence.
Oh, that's a great that's a great application for the church. A lot of the people who would be listening, a lot of my listeners will come out of denominations where we talk about egalitarian versus complementarianism.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, this idea of complementarianism is, yeah, men and women have different roles and they complement one another, but that always keeps the men having having more power, and that it keeps that power differential. Whereas we talk about with egalitarianism, no, we want to balance out that power differential, that men and women are equal because they've both been created in the image and likeness of God, right? So because of that, they have equal status as human beings. And that we always have to be balancing and watching that power. If there's a power imbalance,
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna as soon as there's a power imbalance, we're gonna start to see abuse, and whether it's power abuse, spiritual abuse, sexual abuse, you know, physical abuse. Um, you used a great phrase of you talked about gaslighting, but then you said you use a different word to explain gaslighting, and I like that. So will you talk about the difference? I do want to get into stay shaming, but I'm kind of saving that for a bit. But like the difference between gaslighting and persuasion, like how do you use that to define what's actually happening in these relationships?
Absolutely.
Specifically marriage. Yeah.
Yeah, so gaslighting, in my opinion, is a great term. I use that term. It has, however, been kind of usurped by pop psychology. Social media influencers use the term gaslighting a lot. And so I think it's lost some of its potency. Furthermore, the study of persuasion is a whole field within the discipline of psychology. Persuasion, as it relates to what cult leaders do, persuasion as it relates to dominator culture, or just power and control dynamics, misogyny, things like that. So when we talk about persuasion, there's a more rich field of data and research, and these terms, in my opinion, are stronger. So the abusive behavior and communication, or the ABC, that accompanies secret fidelity violations, is really broken down into three things, according to my theory. One is deception. Deception can be overt, outright lies, or acts of omission. Making sure the partner asks the perfect question before you would give the response to that. So, intending to be honest, but only if asked exactly right what it is that needs to be disclosed. So there's a whole continuum of deception. Then the second piece of abusive behavior and communication is persuasion. And that's my term that I use essentially to illuminate gaslighting. And the way that I do that is by incorporating some concepts from other researchers, psychologists. For instance, Lisa Aronson Fontes came up with the term perspecticide, which just in that term, you hear when somebody's own perspective has essentially, been unalived, right? There's this sense of, I can't believe my internal and external experience because I'm up against the manipulation of another person. Furthermore, there's, concepts about thought reform, where we are taking a look at what what do we do when we're trying to get somebody to really buy into a reality that isn't accurate? And this is stuff, like I said, that cult leaders do, or people who are leading unethical business practices, or even politicians, where they're, highlighting certain things and enough truth to really cause a false picture to be believed. And so the second piece of abusive behavior and communication is this persuasion. And it really includes all forms of gaslighting, manipulation of the reality, using attributes of the partner against them. For instance, their spirituality. If you're really it's as deep into your faith as you say, why are you having so much trouble forgiving me? Or, I'm a pastor, or I'm a person who dedicates my whole life to ministry, and you're trying to tell me that I'm just cheating on you, and that I'm lying to you about this. Like, where do you come off feeling that way about me? Everybody else knows, what kind of man I am, and you're the one who just has your doubts. What's going on with you? Or using other attributes against them, like their own psychological concerns or trauma histories, like, your dad cheated on your mom, and so you just think all men are cheaters. Or you have issues with trust, and that's really affecting our relationship. So that would be examples of perspecticide, of persuasion, to get someone to not believe their reality. And then the third piece of abusive behavior and communication is exploitation. And I won't go too deep into it, but essentially exploiting aspects of the relationship or the partner that work to the benefit of the person trying to keep secrets.
Yeah. Um, how I feel like there are, like, so I'll just use me for example. There have been a number of couples that I've run into over the years where, like, I see it and I want to help them,
Yeah.
but they're really stuck in that. uh you didn't say mind control, but what was the phrase you
Thought
said?
reform.
Thought
Yeah.
reform. Okay, so they're like, no, no, that when it was my fault, or if I had been more sexually available, they wouldn't have cheated.
Mhm.
Like how can we, like, how could I help someone to just even start that process? um yeah, I
Yeah.
guess I'm, yeah, like they've
It,
come to me and they've said, i I feel like I'm losing my mind, and I know that they need help, but yeah.
You know what, Joanne, that is the question of the hour. And I'll give you my perspective on it. Because that partner is working against so much subterfuge, there's so much stratagem being used against them to keep them from knowing the full context of their reality. Because of that, people like us from the outside are going to really struggle to help them identify the mistreatment. And it's not for any weakness or lack of insight on their part. It's because their relational reality is revolving around the axis of this abusive behavior and communication. And they're in that one down position that they can maybe feel, but there isn't enough information given to them to be able to accurately assess the picture of how bad things really are. Now, sometimes from the outside, we can sense it, or even the partner, him or herself, can sense it and will bring these concerns to their pastor, their therapist. But at the end of the day, there's not enough in their reality that makes sense that this is full-blown abusive, stuff. And again, it's not just the cheating. We're not talking about cheating necessarily as abuse. We're talking about the withholding of the reality of that person's well-being and safety. So here's my perspective. Most partners have trouble really coming to terms with the endangerment they've faced until they get to a point of reality collapse. And reality collapse, the way I define it, is that this is the point where a partner has sufficient information to understand the depth and breadth of how bad things are, the extent to which their partner has gone to lie to them, deceive them, betray them. And it doesn't mean they know everything about the betrayals. It just means they kind of reach this epiphany point where whoa, this is worse than I thought. Whoa, there's probably more than I don't know. And it's at that point that partners really have an open window for helpers like us to be able to talk with them about how their reality has just collapsed, and they feel like maybe they look back over their life and think a lot of it's been a lie, and they start to process their memories retroactively in light of this new epiphany. And that's when, we get to help them hold up the magnifying glass and say, is this a picture of equity? Is this memory you're processing a sign or demonstration of you being safe? And so oftentimes that's when people will start to come in and get help. But even before that, when they come to get help, it can be challenging to help them kind of identify some of this stuff, because they're up against so much deception and persuasion and exploitation.
Wow. There's so much application for obviously couples, but then also religious trauma. I like see all the threads. It's like, this is good stuff. I feel like, man, if there's even one person listening who either has experienced this chronic trauma, either in a marriage or in their religious experience,
Mhm.
maybe it will help, I guess, the breakdown of the reality, right? The
Yeah.
collapse. Like, I really like that terminology, reality collapse. Like, that's really what has to happen in
Mhm.
order for them to get help. And anyway, that makes a lot of sense. Like, there's when we talk about uh addicts, and that they have to hit bottom. I think it's just for victims. I think this is that idea of reality collapse for them. Whether it might be the um, comparison,
Yeah.
victim versus addict. Uh, can we talk about this idea of stay shaming? I like that terminology, and I feel like it might give some people clarity. What do you mean by stay shaming? And then, like, how can we help people through that?
Yes. Stay shaming is essentially the idea that if there's, let's say, a woman who's been cheated on and deceived, and she's really working to restore her marriage, a lot of times people on the outside, family members, church family, friends, even therapists, clergy, are going to want to really understand what it is. It's hard for us sometimes to wrap our heads around, why would she want to stay? Does she not recognize she doesn't deserve to be treated that way? Or general society sometimes will kind of decide, once a cheater, always a cheater, or if somebody did that in the first place, they're not able to change. And so, why is she so, maybe deluded or, deceived that there's going to be something better for her in this relationship down the pike? And that is really damaging. You were just talking about, church trauma, right? But there is therapy and clergy induced trauma that, can happen for people who are seeking help in this place of experiencing complex partner trauma. And oftentimes they're getting advice that makes things more confusing for them. So sometimes the advice is just bad advice, like, well, maybe you should, submit or figure out your husband's love language, or consider if you're offering your body to your partner in a way that, blah, 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 right? And thankfully, I think that's more seldom, but it still exists, and it's very sad and damaging information. But other type of, encouragements that people will give to partners in this situation are things like, do you really think that your partner is going to change? Or, if that happened to me, I would be out of there. And I'm just concerned that, you aren't seeing how bad this is. And oftentimes what we're doing from the outside is unintentional stay shaming. In fact, our concern is for the person and their well-being, their safety, their healing. But what we're doing is we're adding on kind of our own prescriptives and asking them to do labor for us, to answer our questions, to help us figure out what's going on when it's not really our business, right? If they have shared with us and they're asking for support from us, then I suppose they've invited us into their business, but they haven't necessarily, even when they ask for our perspective, it's not up to us to prescribe for them whether they should stay or they should go. I'm a firm believer that if even my client doesn't know if they should stay or they should go, that there's no way I could know that for them, because there's a lot of barriers that partners face when they're trying to, decide whether or not this is going to be fixable. So stay shaming is just all about taking a look at our unconscious biases and how we might project them onto these people who are struggling. It's one of the quickest ways to get them to stop being open with us. And so if you've found that walking alongside someone has changed and they're no longer sharing much information, it's most likely because there has been either an inadequate understanding of their struggle and their pain, or some prescriptives offered to them that just added to the rubble heap and made it really unsafe, essentially, to keep processing with you.
Okay, so I want to stay here for a minute, because what and I think this is important, especially for pastors who are listening, because we have seen so often that we see a lot the flip side, the toxic side of, you should forgive and you should give them another chance and you should stay, and we don't give them permission to make their own decision, right?
Yeah.
So we've tried to counterbalance by saying you don't have to stay. Like, we've tried to counterbalance the other side. So we're so, like, the other people are stay shaming in you should stay, right? And now we flip to the other side, but we're stay shaming by saying you should get out.
Yeah.
And so where's, like, I guess the question is, where's the healthy middle for us? Like, how can we be a healthy advocate rather than a toxic advocate for people?
Well, my goal with the Betrayal Violence Institute is to help people across all disciplines: medical professionals, legal professionals, clergy, mental health clinicians, coaches. It's to help them understand the barriers that people face when they've been victimized in this way. And one of those barriers is the idea that when somebody finally gets caught with their secret behavior, or sudden change is beginning to occur, that oftentimes this generates hopefulness that perhaps the relationship can finally heal. See, because most partners who've been victimized in this way have had their share of struggles. Maybe they found out some information along the way, but not all of it, of course. Maybe they have had uneasy feelings and they've had to make meaning out of thin air because they didn't know what was really going on. So they decide this is just how my partner is, or maybe our marriage is just kind of past the honeymoon phase, and or maybe I need to do more of this or less of this. And so when they're facing barriers like that, and then all of a sudden their partner's remorseful, demonstrating a desire for change, this is sometimes the catalyst for a lot of hope and the time they want to embark on really, trying to restore the relationship. So that's one thing I think people need to understand. Instead of stay shaming, we are not within the walls of that home. And as difficult as it may be for them, or as treacherous as some of the behaviors may have been, there's also reasons that they may want to stay. Now, if those reasons don't involve hope or change on behalf of their partner, sometimes they involve difficulty, figuring out how to be alone, difficulty figuring out how to establish life on their own. Maybe they're in, retirement and they're living out their retirement dream, or prepping to dive into that, legacy that they've planned for all their life with their partner. Why would they want to invoke a whole new crisis if this crisis is going on? Sometimes staying put is a place where they can sort through things without additional layers of change and trauma. And furthermore, their partner is the one who knows what they're going through. And whether or not they're empathic enough or there for them enough, there is sometimes a need to be able to have someone who really understands at least what has occurred. And because they can feel very lonely. Partners can be, quite isolated if they don't know others who've been through this. And so there's a bit of a bond, around that as well. So those are just a few of many, many examples. There's cultural issues and social mores and things that also impact why people choose to try and work their relationships out, or choose to leave immediately without maybe covering the bases that would be healthy to cover before just up and leaving.
Yeah. So at your institute, then, do you offer like workshops and stuff, or?
Right now, I'm training organizations to
Okay.
become betrayal, violence informed. And so, you could think of it like an organic stamp on a banana. There's plenty of clinics out there and churches that have counseling centers and, places where, people are interested to know how to handle this in a way that comprises the whole issue, not just the sexual piece. And
Right.
so that's the work I'm focusing on right now through BVI.
Hmm. Wow, that's good stuff. Um, I have a ton of questions for you. Um, uh, so I guess let's just kind of leave it at like usually I say um, if there's one thing you really want to leave um, pastors with, like how can you be a better pastor for people in your congregation who experience this? So kind of like, yeah, like you're like if I can only tell you one or two things, like this is what I want you to know. Yeah.
Oh man, that is such a rich question. I'll probably wake up at 2 a.m. and think,
Right.
oh, this too, and this too. Thank you for that one, Joanne. Here's what I'm really thinking the world needs to know about partners who experience this kind of betrayal. What they're experiencing is ongoing, repeated, secret sexual behaviors, betrayals, and then a bunch of deception, gaslighting, etc., to keep it hidden from them. And so when their reality has been put into a straitjacket by their most beloved, closest person, the one that they committed their life to, built a legacy of children with, or a business or a ministry with, and they learn the gravity of the deception, the power and control that had been used against them. It doesn't just drain all the love that they have for their partner out. In fact, it's quite debilitating to discover that you may have been giving to your partner while they were stealing from you. And so the attachment injury here is the idea that maybe even if they knew some things were not okay and that there was some betrayals, most partners continue attachment investing, meaning giving of themselves freely and benevolently, even all the more when they learn those things are occurring, because they want to create a strong, healthy bond and a sense of powerful connection in their relationship. And so when they learn that they gave all of these efforts out of good intentions and goodwill and love and benevolence, and meanwhile, their partner was essentially a wolf in sheep's cloth, it ends up feeling so much like having experienced terrorism from the inside, because it's one of the most unsafe positions to be in when you continue being vulnerable and contributing to your partner and the relationship and their career and the family in a way that is sacrificial and good-hearted, while you were being deeply betrayed and manipulated in the process. So if there's one thing to understand, it's this attachment investing piece is huge. When you look at the criteria that I've created for complex partner trauma, it's essentially three things. One is that the partner experienced endangerment, where their partner was secretly, repeatedly violating fidelity and then using all that abusive behavior and communication to keep it hidden. That's the position from which then a person is attachment investing, and they give of themselves for years or decades even, until reality collapse occurs and they learn that this is worse than I ever thought. I knew it wasn't good. I knew it was bad even, but man, now I recognize how serious and grave the situation is. And the third piece then of complex partner trauma is all the detriment that accumulates in multiple dimensions of wellness, like your psychological wellness, your physical body, your emotional and spiritual existential crises, It is so impactful and traumatic. And that's what I want people to understand. That's why we can't just quick get these people to safety, or quick get them to realize this or that, or quick make a decision about whether they should stay or go, or what kind of boundaries they should have, or if they should or shouldn't be having sex with their partner. We have to understand that they're in a place of complete and utter disorientation. And there's often a lot of self-doubt and guilt that people experience for having given so much of themselves while they were in unsafe contexts.
Wow, this is good. This really helps to put just a better framework around it, and how I think this is going to help pastors to see this from the other person's perspective, right? Especially if you haven't experienced any kind of abuse in your own personal life, whether your childhood or whatever. It's such a foreign concept, right? And I think this is going to help them to be able to offer more empathy, because they can start to understand it from their perspective.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And that's my hope too. If our job is to support, it's to believe that change is possible for both members of the couple. And also that power and control, when it's present and there's a power differential, that really removes any responsibility on part of the victim to contribute to the marriage. They really just need to find the safety for themselves to find their own healing. And the person who has done the betraying needs to get well. They need to contribute to the relationship if it still exists by initiating trust rebuilding protocols. And they need to have a tremendous ability to be present for their partner. And that all is part of the rehabilitation stuff that I teach through the Institute. But change is possible for both folks.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm definitely going to put all of your links in the show notes, so they can access any of that information that whether it's for themselves or for somebody else. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing this.
Thank you. Your questions were awesome. And I so enjoy talking with you. It's a blessing to be opening up with this information in the spiritual community. I can't wait for more opportunities of this nature. And I just want to thank you for your invite.
Good. We've been trying to tell better stories about women and clergy and the church, because we really need to tell better stories. Instead of just complaining about it, what if we flood the airwaves with something different?